And welcome everyone. My name is Tanya Hertz. I'm the director of the Rec Innovation Lab. And what we have going right now, you probably can't see this on the recording, but you should be able to see it live, is a poll. And what we're doing is we're choosing which topic to actually cover today. So our guest speaker is so well versed in so many different things that he's letting the audience decide. I know, right? But it's true, right? So Shaun is going to be talking about whatever you want to talk about. And so that's what we're doing right now, is making the decision. So while everybody's making the decision about what legal topics to cover for the day, I will actually let our student interns introduce the guest speaker. So I believe Andrew will be taking it from there. All right, Andrew, take it away.
Hi everyone, this is our guest speaker for today. Shaun Spalding is talking about Law 101 for entrepreneurs. Shaun Spalding is an IP attorney whose interests include data privacy and licensing. He is also a professor at California Western School, teaching an internet and media clinical course.
Wonderful. Thank you, Andrew. And Shaun, if you would you like me to go ahead and end the poll now, or do you want?
Okay. Yeah. Everybody, make sure you get your last votes in, because it's important. Yeah. Voting is important.
Voting is important. That is great advice right now. Voting is important.
All right. Yeah, you can close it up.
Okay, so so anybody else? I see a couple people just finishing up. All right, we're going to go ahead and close the poll in 3, 2, and 1.
Okay, and
let's see.
How do I see it? Okay. Oh wow, it's a dead heat.
Wow.
All right, three are all tied for 46% of the vote. Okay, so I guess I'll just go from top to bottom. All right, so I'm Shaun Spalding. I teach a couple legal classes at California Western Law School. I work at New Media Rights, and we are a nonprofit. We help a lot of people who are startups and creators and creatives who can't necessarily afford $300, $400, $500 an hour for a lawyer. And so we help a lot of those people for very low cost or free. And so particularly, I work in intellectual property and privacy law. I used to be a filmmaker. I used to work with a lot of big YouTubers and still do work with YouTubers, but in more public interest capacity now. All right, so we don't have much time, and this is why I want to keep it open to questions, and this is also why I wanted to ask you what you wanted to talk about, because there are a handful of videos that you might have seen some parts of that Tanya shared where I've done talks before, but you don't want to hear anything that's not necessarily relevant to you. And so if anything I talk about today is boring, it's unfortunately your fault because you chose the topics. All right. As a follow-up, we are also doing one-on-one consultation. So a lot of the stuff we'll be talking about is very, very general information, but of course everyone has specific questions and wants sort of evaluations and specific feedback. And so what you can do if you want to talk to us for an hour, you can sign up at this link, bit.ly/NMR-consult. And so that will allow you to schedule a time to talk to us. Currently, there's only 3 slots available. So even though it says 3 p.m., 3:15, and 3:30, they're actually all starting at 3 p.m. And so I definitely recommend it. It's a very useful tool. I think a lot of people get a lot out of it, not just sort of learning a little bit more about the law and how it affects what your business practices are, but even just sort of molding your business practices a bit, because if you know that there are certain legal barriers doing X, you can kind of start pivoting towards Y much earlier than if you found out later on. So I think it's very useful. And if all of them fill up, which they do very quickly, so again, if you're interested, I would sign up earlier rather than later. And finally, just one more note, if you do sign up, please, please, please show up. And if you don't believe that you'll show up, please unsign up, because it takes a lot of time and resources for us to prepare for these things. And it also takes away from other people who might be signing up. Finally, this is only for rec students. Unfortunately, I mean, we have a contact form for anyone else not in the rec, but this is particularly just for rec students. So anyone who's not doing the rec currently, we would encourage you to go to our website, newmediarights.org, specifically, and sign up there. All right, so it's all free. Don't worry about any of that stuff. All right, so you all, oh, by the way, we also have a book. It's like $10, $12 on Amazon. It talks about a lot of things that people like yourselves who are starting businesses often need to know. And so it's a lot of the general information that we bring up in lectures like this. All right, so here's what you all wanted to talk about. The first thing is contracts. And so you want to talk about two subjects. The first one is contracts with internal partners. So business partners, first employees, all the necessary contracts that you need. And so agreements with business partners. It's very, very difficult to talk about these things in general. So I'm going to leave it to three very sort of specific concepts. So anything that, if you have a business partner, if you have someone who is coming up with ideas with you, if you have someone who is an integral technical person. So you have maybe the ideas and they're the developer who has all the technical know-how. If you are working with like a sort of business partner where you're both sort of doing all the operations and you expect that you'd be considered co-founders. In any of these situations, you're going to need to deal with at least three different things. And they're compensation, ownership, so of the company, of the product that you're making, the intellectual property, and finally control. And so you should think about all of these things independently. All right, what do I mean by compensation? So thinking very early on about how you want to share the profits, because you're not necessarily going to be formal entities at the very, very beginning of what you're doing. You're not going to be LLCs or corporations, which have very specific ways of how people make money and share profits. And so you're going to need to kind of make that up yourself. And so do we reinvest every single dollar of revenue back into the business that we make? Do we both put in our own money and then it's a loan to the business and then it gets paid back? All of these things, it's very helpful to document them in advance, because it's a very good problem to start making money, but at the same time, you need to know, well, once that money is made, how is it actually going to be allocated? And so you typically do this with contracts. And so again, a contract can be sort of a formal legal document, but also don't necessarily think that it just has to be a piece of paper put together by a lawyer. And so you're going to have to be making a lot of decisions all the time in terms of what these things are, and these things are in flux because your business is consistently changing. And so think about a contract not just as a formal piece of paper made by a lawyer, but also just an agreement between two people that says what your relationship is going to be until you change that agreement. So that can come in an email, right? That can come in a set of notes that you write on a piece of paper, and then you send a picture and say, oh, I agree that this is how we're going to work for now. Like, contracts only need someone to make an offer and then the other person to accept an offer, and for you both to then move forward knowing that this is the way that you're supposed to do it. And so don't think that just because you can't afford a lawyer, you can't actually talk about these things. Of course, a lawyer is going to come up with all sorts of other things that you might not have expected as sort of a first-time entrepreneur, right? You might not think of certain compensation compensation structures that a lawyer might think of. But nevertheless, you can come up with a lot of stuff that can be useful for you right now. And you should be doing that right now because the biggest arguments come from who gets paid and when. All right, ownership of the company. Again, at some point, you're going to formalize your entity if you're successful. And so you need to know, well, who's going to own it? Are you and your partners 50-50? Are you putting in all the work, but this person just has a set of contacts? So at some point, this person's contacts will not necessarily be useful anymore because you get the business off the ground, but maybe they still get some compensation. And so maybe you get more and that person gets less. And so you should really consider both the ownership of the company. And so once there's a formalized entity, that might be shares or equity. So you'll hear these words and you can Google them and figure out that all those things kind of relate to ownership. But there's also ownership of the product. And so that's intellectual property. So copyrights, trademarks, etc. And so imagine for a second that you're a company that you're going to make an online educational course. And so that's the one thing that your company sells is this course. And so if you own 100% of the company, that's great. But if the other person owns 100% of the intellectual property related to the course, so owning the copyrights related to the videos that make up the course and the texts that make up the course, your company doesn't have much value because that person can take that product, so take their copyrights and their trademarks and walk away with it. And then the company would have little value. And so you need to make sure that you understand that ownership is at two different levels. It's at the actual level of the business, and then at the level of the intellectual property. So finally, control. And so again, a very independent concept. And to give you an example, actually, let me give you sort of the nightmare scenario when you're working with another person. Let's say that you all decided that one person wants to make a deal. And so let's say it's a deal with the San Diego airport because they have an incubator program. It seems like it's relatively successful for some people. And so you think that this is a great deal. But your other business partner says, oh, no, I'd rather not put our time and energy into that. I'd like to put my time and energy into pursuing this other route to sell our product. And so person A says, yes, this is great. Person B, you, says no. Who breaks the tie? Because if there's no tiebreaker, then you simply have to dissolve the company. Or someone has to have really hurt feelings. But basically, if you can't agree, you have to dissolve the company and move your separate ways. And then you're concerned about who owns what and how everyone is going to be paid out. So compensation, ownership. And so you have to have safety valves for figuring out who controls what. And so lots of different control is something that lawyers deal with all the time in agreements like this. And so, for example, they might say, hey, this person makes all the decisions about how money is spent, while this person makes all the creative decisions about how the product works. Maybe you have a technical person on your team, and so this person makes all the decisions about who is a tiebreaker decision in terms of how the technological aspects of the product work, while you might control all the business aspects of how it works. And so having these things worked out in advance, whether or not they're in a formal legal agreement drafted by a lawyer, is going to create situations where you don't have untenable issues that make the company fall apart. Control is also very important in terms of how money is spent. Again, not everyone is going to have a sort of formal entity like an LLC or a corporation right now. And so knowing who can spend money on behalf of the business is very important, right? Can someone come back and say, oh, by the way, I spent this $1,000 on X thing for the company and you didn't even realize it? who can enter into contracts on your behalf? Oh, I started up this subscription account that costs us $400 a month and I obligated us for 6 months. Can the person do that? And so I think it's really important initially to figure out who can do what and what are the limitations on those things, because everyone is okay with trying to figure out the limitations of that until there's an actual problem. And once there's an actual problem, no one will be open to compromise on certain things. All right, so just some random scenarios that I laid out about what's it called? Compensation. So if one founder leaves, does the company or the remaining founders have to buy back the departing founder's shares? And if so, at what price? And so this might be a little bit complex for people who haven't formalized their entity or haven't read about sort of how corporations and how shares and equity work. But the simple version of this is that, let's say that everything is going really well for you. And so you have a product, and maybe the product now makes $500 a month, right? This is like great for being a month or two into business, right? Product makes $500 a month. If somebody leaves on month 3, how much are they entitled to, if any, from the compensation based on all the work that they did for months 1, 2, and 3 to start making the company money, right? You have to figure something like that out, because people are going to leave. People, I mean, particularly in the context of going to school, right? You all are going to graduate at some point, and many people might get a job, right? Maybe you're working full time on the startup now, but then you get a job and you're working on it part time, and then you move back to full time after it's successful. And so what happens when people move in and out? That's critical to figure out now. What time commitment to the business is expected of each founder? Because it's one thing to agree on who owns what and who can control what, but then I think in exchange, you have to have sort of minimum commitments as, yes, you get to have control of these things only if you're paying attention to these things and only if you're spending the time and energy necessary to control them. Because if you don't, then we should have someone else control it. Or, sure, we'll give you much more compensation, but you also have to commit to working more than us, right? And so these are the type of things that go into these conversations about compensation, ownership, and control. Finally, how will key decisions be made day to day? So again, lawyers can suggest all sorts of things, but you don't have to be an attorney to think about what some of these things are, right? Maybe you have majority votes for certain things. Maybe you have to have everyone agree for certain things. Maybe there are certain things that no one except for the sort of primary founder can make. I mean, no decisions that the primary founder can make. All right. Under what circumstances can someone be removed? Right? Yes, everything is going great right now with the person or people that you're working with, but that's not always going to be true. On some level, the more money and time and sort of mental energy invested into the project, the more people are unwilling to compromise, right? So everyone will be very, very flexible initially, but everyone will be increasingly inflexible as time goes on. And so on some level, you'll have to have a way for everyone to agree that if people don't align with their commitments, or if the business changes so fundamentally that someone's skill set isn't needed anymore, not only can they be removed, but they can also feel okay about being removed. Because it's one thing to just be able to kick someone out, but it's completely different to kick someone out but make them feel okay about it, make them feel good about it, because this is where problems show up, right? If someone doesn't understand why they were forced to leave and doesn't feel okay with however they were treated afterwards. And so you don't want an enemy to form an enemy of the business if you don't have to, and you don't have to if you come up with all these things in advance. All right. So what assets does everyone contribute or invest into the business? And so every people might have to put their own money into it, or even money of friends or family. And so how do you get that money back out? Does everyone agree that these things are loans? Does everyone do you exchange this money for some sort of extra ownership of the business? And don't just think about this as people contributing cash, because there are other assets. There are skills and contacts that people can contribute. If you, for example, know a person who can get you into the specific industry that you're trying to get into, that's actually a very valuable investment if this person uses all of the social capital that they've built up over the years to contribute that to the business. And so if you're the type of person doing that, you should think about, well, that should be rewarded. And again, you can go to a lawyer to think about all of these things and get this all on paper, but you can also just really think about it between all of yourselves and figure it out in an informal way, such that you're set up very well when you end up talking to a lawyer about doing this in a more formal way. How will you sell the business? So it seems like it's crazy to think, oh, well, we're not even in business yet. Why are we thinking about selling it? But basically, I think that, and Tanya and maybe some of the other speakers have talked about this before. Well, you're in business for a specific goal. And so you have an exit strategy, right? And so if you always keep your eye on what that exit strategy is, it makes it more likely that you'll hone what you're doing and you'll actually be successful in what you're doing. So if your exit strategy is, oh, I'd like to be purchased by a larger business that can has better contacts or more resources, and so we can continue doing what we do in a bigger way, then you should figure out now what that sale might look like. Who benefits, who has to be continually attached to the business afterwards, who is okay with leaving the business if it's sold, etc. And then finally, not to belabor all of this because you're starting to see patterns, but what happens if someone isn't living up to expectations, right? Can they be removed? Can their ownership or control be minimized in some way? Can their compensation be minimized in some way if they're not living up to expectations? So again, very, very, very high level overview, but the takeaway is any one of these things, and you don't have to answer every question, but any one of these things, answering it between yourselves will actually make things much better, assuming that you're going to run into these questions, because many businesses run into these questions, and these are the types of questions that tear people apart at relatively early stages. All right, so poll, where's the poll?
I actually have to reopen the poll again.
Okay, so just want to make sure that I
touch on everything. Let's see here.
Yeah, and while that's happening, I'll see if I can read the chat.
And I was going to say also, Shaun, yes, we actually had a workshop. The name of the workshop was something like exit strategies, right? To begin with the exit strategy in mind, I think was the name, but very important.
Yeah,
very important.
Yeah, fantastic. So I'm not just making this up. I'm not just making this up.
He knows what he's talking about, right?
All right, so
can you, I was gonna say, you can see the poll results?
Oh yeah, I can see your poll results. All right, next thing is contracts with third parties. So for example, vendors and developers. And so at some point, you're going to have a contract with a distribution partner if you have a product, right? Like it could be a retail store, it could be a website that sells your product. You could have a vendor, someone who supplies you with the materials to make the thing that you make, or even the online platform that allows you to sell the thing that you make. And so you're going to have lots of contracts with third parties. One type of contract that I'm going to use is the example, since it's relatively straightforward when you're starting up maybe a technological type business that you might have a website or an app that you create. And so I'm going to use contracts with app developers and website developers as the metaphor for a lot of these types of contracts. And so many contracts that are with your third parties are going to deal with the following: deliverables, timing, minimum standards, technical support, updates and continuing service levels, and then finally ownership of the work created. And so all these words, they probably don't mean anything to you yet. So I will hopefully make them mean something to you. All right. So again, the scenario is you are now in business and you have, let's say, a Squarespace site. Again, one thing that I think is important before I start, you don't want to reinvent the wheel. If you don't have to hire someone to code a very complicated app or make an extremely complicated website, there are a lot of ways that you can move your MVP forward without actually having external partners do that much work, right? So there's sites like Squarespace where you can make your own website relatively easily with e-commerce functions. There's websites like Teachable if you wanted to create an online course. They have a platform that literally is all about making it easy to engineer and sell online courses. And so you're going to have to, I think the first step of this process is not even thinking about having a contract with these people. It's thinking about whether or not I even need to complicate my MVP so much that I would involve another set of third parties where I have a complicated relationship like this with them. But if you need these types of third parties, let's talk about what I mean by deliverables. So you're going to have to figure out what they're actually going to give you. And so this might seem intensely straightforward, but it's not. And here's why. Let's say that you are a non-technical person, so you don't know very much about how a website is really built. You've gone to websites before, you use the internet, but like you couldn't build one, and so you have to hire someone. Well, if you're hiring someone for something that you don't know how it works, you'll actually find it very difficult to describe what it is that you actually want, because you can describe some of the surface level features of it, right? The things that you see on other websites, but you might not be able to describe the back end functionality. So all of the things that are invisible to you as a person who uses websites, which are mostly what the person who's building a website is interested in and is trying to deliver. And so I think it's very important to have a very, very strong and specific idea of what it is that this person is actually giving you and limit it very, very intensely before you start the relationship with this person. And so this requires doing a lot of work to learn about how websites are developed, because then you can start saying, oh no, I don't want that and I do want that. And you'll also learn the things that cost a lot of money or take a lot of time. And so a lot of these people are going to be working with you for either cheap or free, because they might be trying to support you as a entrepreneur, or they might hope to be a partner in the project. And so you don't want to start asking them to deliver things that are insignificant in terms of the actual being able to sell your product and make money, but very significant in terms of outlays of time. And so you might think, oh, changing this button from red to green because you like green better is an easy fix, but you'll realize very quickly, if that's your deliverable, that maybe the website developer is like, no, that actually takes 3 hours to do. And so learning as much as possible about the thing that you're actually asking someone else to make for you, although it seems counterintuitive, right? It's like, oh, I'm hiring this person because they don't know anything about it. No, you should learn a lot about it, as much as you can as a non-expert, to be able to then manage the expert and understand the things that the expert is saying about how things will and won't be delivered. This is actually also a way not to be taken advantage of, because people who are vendors of services often take advantage of people who don't know what is useful and not useful as a deliverable. And so they might overcharge you for things that you might not need or might not be the type of thing that is useful to you right now. All right, timing. So what I mean by timing is, when are all of these things going to be delivered? And so typically in a complex project like website development, you don't just deliver it all at once and it's not done. It's a process. And so things are delivered in phases. And so these phases, if you want to sort of Google how websites are built or apps are built, or these phases are called milestones. And so at every milestone, there's going to be, hey, now you can see this piece of it work. The rest of it doesn't work, but this small piece of it works. And so you test it, and then you determine whether or not it's up to your standards, and you might give feedback, and then they go back and make changes. And so why this is happening is that instead of delivering the whole thing and then it's all just wrong and it doesn't work well together, in any complex project, people sort of deliver things piecemeal, get approvals, and then hopefully by the time they've delivered each little piece, they can all put it together and it'll work fine. And so you need to figure out when you need each piece by, right? Because the order of operations is important. If one piece is integral for you to start your business running, for you to, for example, sell your product, like a shopping cart, right? You probably want that first, right? Even if it'll take a little bit more time, maybe let's do that first and let's do all of this other aesthetic stuff later on. And so again, if you're highly specific about what you want to get delivered and why you want it to be delivered, then it's going to be relatively easy to figure out, well, when is it absolutely necessary to get by, right? One of the worst nightmare scenarios that can happen is that you build things, so you spend everyone's time, right? Their time making it and your time approving it, and all of your money in building things that aren't actually useful right now. And so being consistent, maybe you build a whole thing and then you realize that it's not something that you actually needed or wanted. And so consistently be careful about what it is that you actually want right now to do the thing that you want to do. All right. And also, one more thing, complex projects, one of the things that I tell people generally when they're entering into these things, they always have a way of ballooning in scope, right? So this actually has a name. You can Google it. It's called scope creep. And so you start out thinking, oh, I just need X, Y, and Z. And then you start making X and Y, and you're like, oh, it would be cool if it also did A, B. And then the developer's like, well, if you do A and B, you should probably also do C. And you're like, oh, that's a great idea. And suddenly you have this whole alphabet of stuff that you never considered at the initial stage of building it that you're now building out. And so if you limit the deliverables and make sure that the timing is very specific and strict, you can avoid having the timing completely shot via scope creep. All right, minimum standards. And so here's what I mean. You don't always know at the outset of a project what it is that you want, right? But you do have an idea about what it is that you don't want. Well, I don't want it to not function, right? I don't want you to make half of it and then leave before finishing the other half. I want to make sure that you don't charge me for extra things that we already agreed that you'd pay. And so you know certain minimum standards that, although I don't know how this relationship is going to go because I might add things, I might subtract things, I do know that I want you to work in a certain way. And so these are the things that you're going to think of when you are trying to determine what your relationship is going to be with your third party, so the developer or so on. And so I'm going to pause again because I'm going to repeat something that I said in the previous set of slides about contracts between partners. not all of these things are going to need I mean, of course, in an ideal world, you might work with an attorney for many of these things to get all of your contracts written up, but that's just unfeasible for many of your relationships with people. And so think about these things not just as like a formal contract. Think about these things as the types of things that you write down and say, oh, here's a list of all the things that I want and don't want out of our relationship, and then presenting those things via email. Because that's how you fix your problems ahead of time, because you actually are an expert at the problems that your business has, right? You've talked to a lot of your mentors, you've asked them, hey, how would I go about doing this, and what are the pitfalls? So now you know the pitfalls. You know these pitfalls as well as any other attorney could potentially. And so you can decide what are the problems I'm going to encounter and what do I want to make sure to say to this developer, say to this vendor, to make sure that that problem doesn't happen. Technical support. All right, this is really important. And so this is something that I think is very critical for people who are working with app developers or website developers. Once this person makes this great website for you, you probably hire them because you don't know how to make one yourself, or you don't know how to make the specific functionality that this person worked on yourself. And so how are you actually going to fix it if it breaks, if you don't know how it works? And so you must actually have a continuing relationship with these technical people in case, for example, the users who use it tell you that it's broken in some ways and that it needs to be fixed. Or the users have questions about how it works from a functional standpoint. You have to be able to work with the people who made it to tell you how it works so you can relay that information. And so just because someone's actually fully delivered something on time and it worked out to your standards doesn't actually mean that you're done with them. And so again, a misconception, a sort of myth that people sometimes enter into is the idea that you buy a website or you buy an app like you buy something at the supermarket, right? That's not the case. It's actually the initial creation is the beginning of an ongoing relationship. And so another part of that ongoing relationship is updates, right? So you build something and it's technical and 100 people use it, and then 10 of them have problems, and one of them emails you and says, oh, here's a problem that I think a lot of other people are having. So you fix that thing. Then 1,000 people use it because it's more successful because you fix this one problem. But then 100 people have another problem, and 10 of them email you and say, oh, here's a problem that I think that you have. And so you have to fix the other 5 problems that they brought up. And then 10,000 people use it because now it's super successful. But then 1,000 of those people had a problem, and 100 of those people email you, and now there's 100 new problems that you need to fix. And this is a great problem because clearly you're successful, but it's also a problem because now if you didn't anticipate in your agreement that it's not over when they've delivered stuff on time. Instead, delivering stuff on time and having it work is sort of the minimum to get you into the door to then make it actually useful and good for people. Because this is true of any complicated thing that gets made, that it's not going to be perfect out of the box, right? This is why there's sort of that concept of the MVP, because if you spend so much time with all of the thoughts in your head about what you think is good, you won't actually realize what the users of your product or service think is good. And if you're not paying attention to those things and just responding to those things, you might be losing out on you might not give the market a product that it needs, right? And so updates are the key way of responding technically to issues with the product and ways to make it better and ways to make the customer experience better. And so this is what I mean by continuing service levels. On some level, you're going to have to continue working with this website developer, this app developer, to continue making updates, to continue providing technical support. And as a result, you need to, in advance, right? Because this website developer is now a business partner, right? On some level, you need them in some ways more than they need you. Because, and again, this is something specific to many complex projects, but particularly website development and coding, a lot of this stuff is hard to transfer to another developer. So if developer A works for 2 months making something for you, if you give it to if you fire developer A and you give it to developer B might take 1 month just learning all of the things that developer A did and getting up to speed before they even can move forward. And so that takes time, right? Time that you might not have if you need to push out updates. And that also takes money because you might be paying developer B to work on something for a couple weeks simply to get back up to speed in the same way that developer A, who you've also paid, is. And so this is a bad thing. So how do you counteract that? You anticipate in advance that these people need to be working with you. And so you require them to guarantee on a certain level that they'll come back and do things like update and technical support. Because again, you're probably going to be working with developers who are students themselves or who want some sort of meaningful connection with your startup because they hope that they can sort of rise to be initial partner of yours. And so I think that it's important to keep that in mind, that people will move on if they're students and they get jobs. People will move on if they don't necessarily get the value of being a partner, so the ownership, control, and compensation. And if they move on, you still need them just as much as maybe they need you or more. Finally, ownership. So since we don't have very much time, it's very hard to talk in depth about intellectual property, but basically anyone making creative work for you, so be that a writer who's writing marketing stuff, someone who's writing press releases, someone who is creating images for you on social media, up to people who are making your website or app. All these people are creating intellectual property, and mostly in the absence of a written agreement, they own the things that they make, not you. So imagine, here's an example. If I told you, hey, please write a book for me and I'll give you $2,000 and you give me a book. It's it's a romance novel, right? So you quickly type out this romance novel and it's very, very good. And it's just like 50 Shades of Grey or something. It's very shocking and very exciting. I love it as a romance novel. And so I hand you the $2,000 and you hand me a bunch of 180 type pages. And this is now the romance novel that you gave me. What I own is not the novel in terms of being able to republish the novel, to put the novel online for other people to read. What I own currently is the 180 pieces of paper that you gave me and the ink on top of the paper. Until I have a written contractual agreement with you that transfers the ability to make copies of it and the ability to post it online, I can't do that even though I paid you $2,000 to make this for me. And so this is why having a contractual arrangement with anybody making this type of thing is important to you, because one of the things that needs to be in writing under the law, like a lot of things can not be in writing, but one of the things that needs to be in writing is the transfer of intellectual property related to work. And so if you're working, again, with anybody who's making something creative, be it a logo, graphic designs, be it stuff on social media, these people all need transfers to you. And you can look this up in much more detail. You can Google entrepreneur, intellectual property, and find lots of blogs and articles giving you more information about that. All right, poll. Let's finish out the last one. I think it
All
was
right, sounds good.
trademarks.
I believe so. Let me just double check. No, yeah, it was trademarks. You're right.
Okay, and what time does this end?
Oh, well, it technically ends at 1.
Okay, I'll buzz through this, see if there's any questions, and if not, then I'll just continue.
Thanks, Shaun. I appreciate it.
All right, trademarks. So the one question is how to figure out if trademark registration is worth it. And so you can Google what a trademark is. I think that there's a lot of general information all over the internet about this, but this is the most typical question that people have, and I think probably the most complicated thing, right? You learn all about trademarks, you read websites that say, oh, well, register your trademark, but then no one actually gives you a straight answer as to whether or not you should pay the anywhere from $1 to $3,500 to actually register your trademark. So here's my usual explanation of how to do this. All right, how valuable is the name to your business? And so if your business or product lives and dies on the name, right, then that might be a sign that it's very valuable, right? You sort of see this triangle, and what I mean by the triangle is that these three things in the different colors, these three sentences need to be balanced because they're all competing interests. And so think about something like Bikram yoga or CrossFit. And so anybody can start a hot yoga studio, but if it's called a Bikram yoga studio, suddenly people will go to that more. Anyone can do the same exercises that CrossFit does, but if it's a CrossFit gym, everyone knows what you're talking about, and there's a whole cult of people who just love CrossFit, and so they're interested in going to a CrossFit gym, and so those trademarks are extremely valuable. If you're an exercise company, if you're like a product, fashion, for example, these things are all the things that trademarks are very valuable, and names are very valuable. All right, how much could this money be used for something more important? So you can register a trademark yourself, but I'd actually recommend an attorney, one of the few situations where I'd say, even though you can do it yourself, I would say it's very important that you at least consider working with an attorney. And so that's $3,000. Well, you can use $3,000 for all sorts of stuff that has to do with your business that actually can make money for you. And so it also takes time. Even if you're hiring someone else to do it, you still have to manage that person doing it and answer their questions and send them all the samples and things that are necessary for registration. And so is this the right time to do it? Or do you have immediate things that you could spend that money and time on doing? And then you could wait till a little bit later to do it. So this is the second of the considerations that you need to balance when thinking about whether or not to register your trademark. Right? How soon do you need to take advantage of the benefits of registration? So one thing that's important is that I think that if you go to any sort of trademark related firm, they'll always say, oh, register, and you're asking why, because it's important. And it's like, but why is it important? And I think that, of course, trademark law firms have a economically vested interest in convincing you that trademarks are important generally, but they're really important for very specific things, particularly for startups, many of which might pivot pretty constantly in your first couple months or even first couple years. And so one of those things is, are you licensing the trademark anytime soon, right? So if you create a new exercise program like CrossFit, right, your whole business revolves around licensing, right? You make a cool exercise program and then you tell other people, oh, you can also use this cool exercise program. That's licensing. And so you can't license things very well if you don't have a registered trademark. Another benefit are you moving into a national market? And so people have certain trademark rights just by selling things under a product name. So a common example is if you start a restaurant in San Diego called, I don't know, the Big Kahuna, right? It's a Hawaiian restaurant. If you, for example, have a competitor that starts the Kahuna right next door a year later because they realize that your restaurant's so popular, you have certain rights to tell them not to do that based on trademark. And so one of the benefits of registering your trademark nationally is that you go beyond sort of your little geographic area where your current Big Kahuna restaurant is located. And now if someone opens up a Big Kahuna in Alaska or Hawaii or Washington, D.C., in any of those places, you could potentially get them to stop. And so this is another benefit of federal registration. There are tons of these benefits, but what I'm getting at is that you should consistently weigh how valuable the name actually is to how close it is that you want to take advantage of these benefits and how much this money is actually and time is actually valuable to you, right? Because maybe you should do it today, or maybe you should do it 6 months from now. There's all sorts of places that you could do it. So this is just a timeline of all sorts of different places that you can think about registering your trademark, right? Maybe you register it while you're still working on it, but that doesn't make too much sense because maybe when you're working on it, you decide to call your product something different. Maybe you do it when you soft launch, right? You do it when your friends and family are using the product or service. But who cares about a trademark when your friends and family are using it? Because again, maybe they say, oh, the name that you call it is stupid, call it something else. Or maybe your logo looks dumb, you should change it to something else. Your soft launch is actually the place where you're thinking about these things, right? Well, maybe at the time of full launch because you don't want people competing with you right away. But maybe that's also not a great time necessarily because the only people competing with you might be in the same geographic area. And so if you're first in time in terms of using it in a geographic area, again, remember you have certain protections without even registering it. By the time you bring on external partners, so for example, you have someone who says, oh, I'm going to open up a bunch of these exercise chains under your name all across the San Diego area. This is the time where you're going to want to register a trademark because many people might not want to do that type of deal with you if they don't have the protection of a registered trademark because they're going to contractually ask you for that. And so if you didn't 6 months before this happened start the registration process, you might not be able to actually bring on that partner yet, or their bringing them on might be contingent to getting the trademark actually registered. And sometimes it's actually difficult to get your trademark registered. Let's say that you're relying potentially on outside investors, right? Again, outside investors, if most of the value of your project comes from your name, no one is going to want to work with you and invest money in you if your name isn't secured as a trademark. And so this is one set of, I guess, circumstances. And you can see how this changes very significantly based on what you're specifically doing, who the types of people you're working with are, what it means for you to launch the public, etc. All right, so lots done today. Lots of run-on sentences. I have to talk like crazy, but does anybody have any questions?
So
And
we
I'll feel free
have a
to.
question from Jessica. She
Mhm.
asks, will there be more slots available on October 29th at 3 p.m. or on another date? The slot.
Oh, they're already filled up. I'm gonna say tentative yes. If she can email me at I'm gonna write the thing in the chat, support newmediarights.org. She can let us know that, oh, I'm part of the rec and all slots are taken. Can you let me know when we're adding a new set of times, and then we'll be
I
able
think
to do
there might be more than this too, because I had a couple people sending me messages as well.
Okay, yeah. So that's for everybody. Please email the support@newmediarights.org ORG in the chat. All
I
right.
have a question. This is
Yep.
Karen from Trendbook. Hi,
Hey.
Shaun. How are you? I
Nice
hope you're
seeing you
doing
again.
well. Nice to
Yep.
see you too. I had a question. So I actually filed for a trademark. I filed on my own, and I actually filed not the suggested one. There's one where you can write your own class.
Mhm.
And of course, they sent me back with, oh God, I think it's like a correction.
Mhm.
Is that something that you cover or would look over in the meetings when we meet with you? Would you, or what is the, I guess, the guidelines as far as what we talk about?
So if you you can email me at support@newmediarights.org, because what you got was called a trademark office action.
It is an office action. Yes, that's what.
Yeah, there you go. And so those are sometimes easy to correct and sometimes difficult, but we don't necessarily correct those things. And also that's not the type of thing that we'd be talking about in the initial meeting. But we could give you a referral to legal clinics that are cheap or free that could respond to the office action. Again, it's kind of difficult to do that type of work because it requires, I'm sure there's going to be like a date that you need to respond by.
I think they give you 6 months before it's considered abandoned.
Yeah. So yeah,
and just by the way, so if you file for a trademark, expect to get lots of letters, lots of emails, lots of people telling you that there's something wrong with your trademark and you need to go to their law firm, or lots of spam pretending.
Hey Karen, you paid for that. That's what you're getting.
I did.
You get all those free emails.
You know how many letters I get? I'm like, I just throw them away after my first scare. But okay, I'll definitely email you, Shaun.
Yeah.
Our meeting.
And we also have a contact form on the website as well. So newmediarights.org, and then go to contact us, and then it's the legal contact form. All right, any other questions?
We have one from Melissa D. She
Hey.
said, can you speak to IP relating to app functionality?
Oh, wow. I could speak about that all day. But unfortunately, we don't have all day. So if that is integral to your project, I would suggest that you reach out to us and we could potentially open up a new slot for you to talk about that in a little bit more depth. But generally, apps are going to overlap with all of the big areas of intellectual property. So copyrights, which protect creative work, trademarks, which protect names of goods and products and sort of like the characteristic looks of them. They're going to overlap with patents in some respect, because apps do specific things, right? So an app can be an invention of a sort, and that's what trademarks protect. And then even trade secrets, because the app might work in a very specific kind of way that many other apps don't. And as a result, you want to keep that confidential because it's the thing that makes your app great. Like, let's say you're Tinder and you've realized, here's the best way to match people who will already like each other just by seeing their faces and profiles. Maybe you don't want other people to know that that's the way that you match people, because that is just what your secret is for making Tinder very good. So yeah, reach out and see if we can open up another slot at some point to talk to you more about that. All right, any other questions?
Good job. We were only 2 minutes over. Thank you so much.
All right, yeah. All right, I know you all need to go.
Can we take a picture? Is it, I mean, if you don't mind, I know.
Yeah.
You can stick around and don't mind. We'll take a photo together. I'm going to go ahead and change the view to gallery and then stop the sharing here.
Oh, okay, it's nice to see everybody's faces.
Right? It's
You
nice.
all are actually
so
real.
Yeah, we're actually here. We're actually people. I know we don't have everybody who is still around, but those of you who can turn on your camera. All right, I'm going to take a photo for just a few of us. All right,
Okay.
and cameras on and smile in 3, 2, and 1. Cheese.
Hey,
Thank
Shaun, thank you for doing this. For all you guys, this is one of the premier organizations to help young artists out.
Wow, thank you.
I actually volunteered when I was in law school.